Hello, everybody. My name is Raxtus,
And I'm Sogail.
and welcome back to Elden Ring.
Woo!
Welcome to Elden Ring or Dark Souls 3. Wow, you ready?
I'm ready.
Woo. So I just wanted to go over kind of like Elden Ring and Dark Souls 3 because I have all these games in my head. I've played through the Dark Souls 3, and then while we were doing that, we went ahead and played through Elden Ring. And when I was finished with Elden Ring, I was like, what about Demon Souls? So I went through and played the original Demon Souls as well, and I just kind of wanted to give my thoughts on Elden Ring, Dark Souls 3, and the differences between those games, and then kind of Demon Souls as well in this as well. But just generally kind of like Souls games. I haven't again played Dark Souls 1 and I haven't played Dark Souls 2. So I probably have a little bit gap in my learning in terms of education in Souls games, but I at least have Dark Souls 3 under my belt and Elden Ring, so I kind of have an idea of where these games are, how they're built, and what are kind of the problems that I can see in each of these games. And I just kind of wanted to just kind of give those results of that data and then just kind of move on, going beyond Souls games because we've gone on Souls games for a little bit too long now, and we have to kind of change it up a little bit here.
Yeah.
But to start it off, I wanted to definitely say there is a Elden Ring save state problem with the save state where you can actually have your save state corrupt in Elden Ring. A lot of people have suggested, and I'll probably suggest the same thing, is turn off your cloud save data because whenever the cloud save state is actually happening, and let's say the game crashes, your power goes out, whatever happens with your internet connection, things go wrong. If things go wrong and you're in the loading screen and you load from, let's say, one side of grace and then you go to a second side of grace, in between those loading screens, this loading screen doesn't fully load, your computer turns off, anything happens in between that save load, you're going to have a problem because the next time that you load up, if you haven't turned off your cloud save data, it can just corrupt your game. So I was at level, I think, like almost 200 ish, 167, something like that.
Uh-huh.
And right in the middle, I was like, okay, I'm almost to Melania. I want to be able to actually test out Melania and see what's actually viable to Melania. I got a loading screen that only went to 70% and it stopped. I had to shut down Elden Ring, and as soon as I turned it back on, it said, your game's corrupt. I asked someone at support, and they said, nothing you can do about it. 20 some plus hours that I put into the game was just gone. So, Elden Ring definitely need to fix this. The current fix that I've seen for it, and a lot of people again have see it said for it, is that you just turn off cloud save data. But again, that's pretty big when I spend plus 20 hours trying to actually get through the game, and then the game doesn't load or the game has issues, and then the game shuts down, and I end up losing that progress. So
Yeah.
that's pretty annoying. One thing that's throughout the Souls games, and one thing that's really annoying throughout every single Souls games, is just falling. And I'm just going to say tile sets versus open world because it's a difference between maps. So if you look at Elden Ring for the beauty of what Elden Ring is an open world. It has tons of space, tons of area to roam around, and it feels very spacious. This is really good because versus other Dark Souls games like Dark Souls 3 or even Demon Souls has such tight maps. When you're in Demon Souls, it feels so claustrophobic because everything is a tunnel. Everything is so tight. And same thing even with Dark Souls 3. Dark Souls 3 does open it up a little bit more, but Elden Ring takes it a whole different appeal and a whole different feel to it where it's wide, it's spacious, you've got a lot of lush land. However, it does come with caveats. The big caveats that I can see is item acquisition. If you're trying to go through your playthrough and then you need to be able to acquire certain items, you can't just blindly go through the game and go, hey, I can just find those things on my own. Not really, because the world is so big, because it's so open, you need to actually look up the data on where those items specifically are to be able to get those items to be able to make your build viable. In this case, let's say for the Stone Club, there's only one unit that drops the Stone Club early game, and that's in Khalid, outside of Sulla Tunnel, which is right over here. And it's one of the whoops, there it is. Sulla Hideaway. So there's only one unit there at a 4% chance to drop. And the only other 2 units that actually drop this are actually gonna be in the Halig tree. So, for those battle mages, those are the only 3 units that actually drop it, and to specifically get just that one item for you to be able to use the stone club, you need to be able to get the Sela hideaway to be able to even just use that weapon. So again, you need to actually look up where the data of where that item is to be able to use it. So with open world, it's not as favorable to the player because to be able to get those items or to be able to get those things, it can be way across the map. Or even in terms of upgrades, let's say you wanted to upgrade things, you have to be able to find out where your smithing stones are. For smithing stone ones, those are going to be in the Limegrave area, and then of course going beyond Lunaria of the Lakes, and then all the way into Atlas Plateau. And of course, I'll get on to like specific details on upgrading and everything else a little bit later. But again, with the open world, it makes this much more difficult being able to acquire items. The second caveat is going to be with ledges and falling. Ledges and falling is really ridiculous in any of the Souls games, especially Dark Souls 3 or even Demon Souls, where if there is a ledge, you don't know if that ledge is actually lethal fall damage or if you're just going to take a small amount of damage and you're just going to die when you fall off the ledge, or if you're actually going to survive with just a little bit of health left.
Yeah.
This is pretty big because in Demon Souls and Dark Souls 3, you kind of have a pretty good idea of where a lethal ledge is because when you look over the ledge, there's literally nothing. In Elden Ring, however, it looks like you could make the jump, but you don't know.
Yeah, I would have to agree with that.
You don't know when it's
Yeah,
lethal.
you don't know.
So that's my biggest problem right there is where is it actually lethal, and do you actually have to in the game put a floor where where the red line is for your fall height so that when the player looks down, let's say they look down over a ledge, that they can see where that red line is, where that lethal fall damage is, and then they can tell, okay, that is lethal damage, I am going to die from that height, or I am not going to die from that height. But again, at some point in that fall data, you are just going to die when you reach a certain depth of falling. So again, it gets really annoying and really aggravating. I did like it though in Demon Souls, where if you fell from a higher height or something like that, even in Dark Souls 3 or Elden Ring, you'll actually take significantly more damage. Whereas in Demon Souls, it actually makes it so you take a little bit of damage, but not a lot. And I like that because you don't take a huge amount of damage when you do end up falling off of a cliff or off of some high height. Although there is a point where you do hit that lethal height and it's still unclear where it's at. It does make it a little bit more clear in Demon Souls, especially because your heart kind of goes, "Oh no, I am definitely at the point where I could potentially die from this height," and then it does kill you. So Demon Souls, it actually kinetically makes a little bit more sense when you're falling. I'd have to just say in that part.
Yeah, well, I would have to say Elden Ring is a lot more forgiving when you jump down just like on person from a high height, and Dark Souls is not really forgiving. In my opinion, it's not really forgiving.
In Dark Souls 3,
In Dark Souls 3, it's worse in Dark Souls 3 than Elden Ring.
yeah, I would have to say, especially in the Cathedral of the Deep or something like that, where you're up on a certain high height, and then it's like if you miss a jump or if you miss something, then you could potentially die. I could see that, especially in the rafters. But when you're generally just traversing the world in Elden Ring,
Mm-hmm.
let's say you're just moving across terrain and you have, let's say there's a waypoint in your location. Let's say anywhere on the map, and you're just traveling from point A to B.
Yeah.
You don't know that that ledge or wherever you're going across could just dip down, and then even whether you're on torrent or if you're on foot, if you think that you could have survived that, or if you don't see that ledge and you accidentally end up going off of it, that could both of those can potentially kill you. In Dark Souls 3, it's so much clearer because it's like you are on the rafters, you can look down and you can tell that is lethal fall damage.
Yeah.
On Elden Ring, it doesn't make it as clear, especially with terrain specifically, where that lethal fall is, or, you know, if it is lethal or if it's not. In Dark Souls 3, it makes it a little bit clearer if you kind of catch that drift. Dark Souls 3,
Yeah.
there's less areas where you can fall and take that lethal damage, where you know it, it's just it's so much more definitive. This is lethal and this is not lethal.
Mhm.
And then there's less areas where it's gray, where it's like it could be or it could not be. And in Elden Ring, there's so many areas where it's like, I don't know if it is or if it isn't, if you catch that drift.
Oh, yeah, I got it.
Yeah, but there I can agree there though with Dark Souls 3, where yeah, there are quite a few different areas where in the rafters or, in, let's say, the Firelink Shrine, where definitely those falls are lethal, and you can definitely tell that.
Yeah, well, for me, one time I was, like, jumping off of a cliff, well, not like a big cliff on Dark Souls, and I took, like, a huge amount of damage still, even for that small little fall.
Yeah. So that's where I'm saying too, like if you're falling and you take some damage, Demon Souls actually does a better job
Yeah.
because you don't take so much damage. If you fall from that height, from the same height probably in
Mhm.
Demon Souls, the system will actually make it so that you take a little bit less damage than if you were to fall in Dark Souls 3, where Dark Souls 3, it's like I fell from a height and I took so much damage. Why? You know? And maybe that's
Yeah.
because you're out of stamina, maybe there's other systems involved in there, but the most annoying that I've seen of it is actually going to be in Elden Ring.
Hmm.
Yeah. And then, of course, the information wars between games, which I would actually say, um, same thing kind of with globally trying to be able to get a hold of items. It's like, okay, I'm trying to get a hold of this item or I'm trying to get a hold of that item. Well,
Yeah.
where is that item in the game? So, like in Elden Ring, for instance, you start out in Mount Grave, and then you go over to Lunaria of the Lakes, and you go to Atlas, and then of course you go to the Royal Capital, and of course the mountain area. I'm just going to call it Death Mountain over there, and then of course the concentrated snowfield area. Then you go to Halleck Tree, and then you end up with the Crumbling Farm Missoula, and then of course you do have the option to also go to Khalid early if you want to. Well, let's say that your weapon is, the giant crushing hammer. Well, you have to go all the way to Atlas Plateau to be able to get the giant's crushing hammer over here. But let's say that you want, a weapon that's way later in the game, like I believe Melania's blade as well. You can turn in her, I forget what her remembrance is, but I believe you
Her
can
remembrance of the rock goddess.
yeah, so you can turn that in and actually get her blade. Well, again, with item acquisition, if the item is way later in the game and you want to be able to use it earlier, it's not going to be viable at that point. So it's just allowing the player to get that earlier as well. But also, it information wars is more so, where do I get this item and how do I get this item? And especially with the game, you don't know where that item is. So if you're to play Ring blind for your first playthrough, and
Mhm.
you're going to go through it blind, and you have no idea where any of the items are, where any of the flasks are, you have no idea where any of the smithing stone upgrades are, you're going to have to spend so much time trying to adventure and it's going to be hours, if not tens of hours, if not 20 hours plus, trying to find all your upgrading equipment and materials, or dying a whole bunch of times. you know it's just going to be a huge information war on where everything is at. And same thing with Dark Souls 3, or even Demon Souls is going to be worse than Dark Souls 3, of where those items are at. So information wars is really annoying. And I would have to say for secrets, it's not bad because, like, let's say for the the different endings for Rania or any of these, those are great to have information wars on where those different endings are, or even having secret endings to a game.
Yeah.
You should have information wars on where those secret, endings are, or where those secret Easter eggs are, but you shouldn't have information wars on where those equipments or those items are to be able to upgrade or to be able to just progress through the game. It should just be open information, like at the very start of the game. Okay, these are all the equipment, so these are all the items, and maybe more items. Some items are more rare, and some items are less rare, and they cost more or they cost less. But in the get go, you could be able to acquire the majority of those items from the very beginning of the game, which I believe for upgrades and equipment and everything else, that should just be available from the start of the game and not have it way later in the game just to be able to acquire that item that you really want to be able to use.
Oh, yeah.
And of course, you can have item requirements for something like having 38 strength to be able to equip a great sword or a great hammer or something like that. but especially just have it at the start of the game because then you can actually have it, you know?
Mhm.
And maybe some players feel different about that, but that's just kind of my feeling on it. I mean, it does make sense to have something with 38 strength further along the route, but especially if you're a player and you just start out and you're like, hey, you know what? I want to just go full strength and I just want to run that. Just have the item at the beginning of the game. Um,
Yeah.
Acquisition and upgrades. Um, yeah, by the start of the game, and then of course I have my notes here. So world tendency. So world tendency is in Demon Souls. Demon Souls has a world tendency where when you start playing through the game, when you start defeating bosses and whatnot, it adds positive to your world tendency. So world tendency is like if you're doing the game very poorly, you'll start to go into the black, and if you're doing the game really really well, you're start to go into the white. Well, at both ends of the spectrums, on the far end of pure black tendency and pure white tendency, it gives 100% to unlock secret paths in the game. So if you're at pure white, at I believe it's +3 on tier white, it'll start unlocking different areas that you've never gone to from before from the very start of the game. So let's say that you're starting at, the first area, start 1, it'll unlock a secret entrance there, and you can actually go through that secret area and be able to actually discover that area,
Oh,
which
that's nice.
which
That's
is
kind
actually
of nice.
really annoying because you have to go through all the bosses in the first area without dying, because if you die while in your human form, you lose 30% of your world tendency every time that you die while human. And in Dark Souls games or
Oh,
Souls games, you die a lot of the time.
yeah.
So the correct way to play throughout the game is to actually kill yourself in the Nexus and play through the entire game in soul form, because there's no negative to dying in the Nexus. There's no negative world tendency when you die in the Nexus versus if you die in one of the 5 worlds. If you die
Wait,
in one of the 5
what?
worlds, it'll actually go negative with your world tendency, and it'll affect your entire gameplay. You can't unlock those secret areas or, whatever else. You have to be perfect throughout your gameplay. And this is kind of nice though, because with Demon Souls, it's not such a long game to actually play through. And Dark Souls takes a little bit longer to play through. And when you go to Elden Ring takes the longest by far to play through the entire game. Just
Yeah.
saying that. So when you're going through your new game plus, or if you're just restarting your game, it doesn't take as long for Demon Souls to just go through and play through the game. So if you have to, you can actually go that pure route and not have too difficult of time, because for your first game playthrough, it's actually pretty quick to play through it, and then by your second, you're going to be even faster to get through that.
Interesting.
So I wanted to go through kind of like some of those upgrades though, especially for Elden Ring. What I would do in Elden Ring, especially if I'm starting out, I would go through the Limegrave area, get your +2, +1, +2s, and I think some +3s in the Limegrave area. And then when you go throughout your Lunaria of the Lakes, I would get your +5s and then go up through to the Magma Worm Maker and get into some of these areas up here in the Atlas Plateau. And that's where you can get all the way to +5s on your upgrade equipment. And you can actually do that way before you even hit the first boss in the game.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's really ridiculous that you can go all the way to +6 and just be able to have, I believe it's like +21 or +15 or 16 before you even hit your first boss, which in this game and any of the Souls games, upgrading your equipment gives you more damage than upgrading your level. I'm just
Really?
gonna say that throughout any of the games. It doesn't
Hmm.
matter what your strength is at, it doesn't matter what your dex is at, as long as you have the base requirements to actually wield the weapon. It matters more so how many upgrades, how many smithing upgrades you've actually done to your equipment that affects your overall damage rather than your actual level. Because let's say you do a raw upgrade in Dark Souls 3, it's going to go to 309 on Longsword. And then when you do your leveling for Dex, it'll go all the way to like 403. It'll add 100 damage. But if you're upgrading your equipment, I believe from like the very beginning, it only starts at like 80 or something like that. So you're tripling your damage from actual smithing stone upgrades, and you're only adding like 33% from actual levels. in dex or strength. So that's the difference there between smithing stones and leveling. I would honestly just go raw route to begin with, and then later do levels if you really need to. In that case,
Okay.
yeah. So that's in Elden Ring. I've already gone through like Dark Souls 3. If you watch the beginning of Dark Souls 3, I'll actually go over the where the Titanite shards are, Titanite large Titanite shards, the Titanite chunks, and of course the Titanite slabs. Whereas in Dark Souls 3, it's so much easier to get a hold of any of your upgrades for your smithing weapons. It's so much easier to acquire, and then especially if you unlock the Grand Archives and those areas there, it'll just give you not only the greatest farms, but you'll also be able to get a lot of Titanite chunks, even with the angels there, being able to upgrade your equipment and levels. Whereas Elden Ring, it's very specific where all those smithing stones are, and you have to go and pick them up, and you have to go and discover them versus just having them on a base drop rate or anything like that. Demon Souls, I forget. I'm gonna have to load that in my brain for a second. Demon Souls, though, throughout the gameplay, you can go to 2-1 and you can get a lot of the requirements and all the stone shards that you need to be able to upgrade your equipment. Not a lot of drops though, especially from enemies to be able to upgrade your equipment. So it's a lot harder to get your +5 weapons versus just doing a +10 weapon there. So it's a lot easier to get those weapons as well. And then, of course, farming for souls for Elden Ring. Of course, we go to the Khalid, which is Lenny's Rise, and you can do the ball here. This is your best run for that. And then when you go over here to Dragonborough Fork, there's a whole bunch of guardians going up Dragonborough Fork. That'll give you some really good levels early, especially if you do your teleport to the Beastal Sanctum early. That'll give you a lot of early game levels. And then, of course, late game, I'd have to say there is going to be in the deep root depths. I found that there's the golems across the roots in this area, and there's a lot of souls that can be had there. And then for a late game, at the very end of the game, the best way that you can actually get souls is going to be the Palace Approach Ledge. Is it the Palace Approach Ledge? Yeah, it is.
Palace approach, yeah.
Yeah, for the bird, and you can
For
just shoot
the
the bird
just
across.
one bird. I wish there was multiple birds though.
Yeah. Oh, and then one thing I was going to mention is when you're looking at Dark Souls 3 versus Elden Ring,
Hmm.
and you're like, okay, well, what's the difference in leveling for the amount of souls per level? There is zero difference between the two games. There's literally zero difference. If you're looking at the total amount of souls for level 200 and the total amount of souls for level 200 on Dark Souls 3 and Elden Ring, there's literally no difference between the two games on how many souls is actually required for every single level.
Huh.
It's just that maybe Elden Ring gives you more souls for the bosses when you kill the bosses because it's easier to get up to level 200 in Elden Ring, and Dark Souls 3 doesn't give you as many souls per level. But for Dark Souls 3, you have a greater farm, which is the angels up on top of the Grand Archives,
Oh
and
yeah.
they give you, I believe, if you have everything equipped for souls, they give you around 60 to 70k souls per kill. And for the bird here, he only gives you like 11,000, if not 17,000.
13,000 something for non-pickled foot.
Yeah. So
And
he
then
does
17 for pickled.
yeah, it's just he doesn't give as many souls. It takes you about 6 kills to even get up to where the guardians are, but he's a lot faster because all you have to do is shoot one shot off, and then he
Yeah.
falls over the ledge and you get that amount of souls. So I'd have to say Dark Souls 3 is easier for those farms than Elden Ring. And of course, for Dark Souls 3 for the farms, I'm gonna say early Lothric Knights aren't bad. Um, but I believe the Guardians are like your best bet, and Yorm's. Yorm's area there, when you defeat Yorm the Giant and you go from his bonfire back, because Yorm is a cheesy boss,
Yeah.
his area gives you a lot of souls. And then when you get over to the Grand Archives, you can take your leveling even further from there. When you're in Demon Souls, there's not a lot of good farms. I would have to say in the first world, third part, after you get past the Tower Knight, when you
Mm-hmm.
get into the third area before you defeat the third boss, which is the Penetrator, that area there is a really good farm for those knights. Those knights are like the best way to actually farm levels in that area. So that's going to be your best farm there too. One thing that I was going to mention, though, especially with the Golem's bow and the Golem's arrow on farms, is especially in Demon Souls or or in Elden Ring. And I'm just going to go over the Golem's arrow here. The Golem's arrow is a 5% chance to drop. The Golem's great bow is at a 10% drop. These actually should be switched. The Golem's great arrows should be at 10%, and the Golem's great bow should be at 5%. Why is that? Because arrows are consumables. When you're shooting arrows, they are gone. When you shoot them out of your bow, they are out of your inventory, they are gone.
Yeah.
So at a 5% drop chance, I believe I could get 600 of the basic great arrows. I'm going to have to look at my inventory here real quick. But I have,
I don't even have any Golem great arrows. I only have the Golem's magic arrow.
oh, yeah, well, I have a few of those too. So I was apparently more lucky with the Golem's great magic arrow than with the Golem's great arrow, the basic great arrow. But while farming, the Golem also drops at a 50% rate, the great arrows, whereas a 5% chance for the Golem's great arrow. I got 35 of these, and it took me a long time because by the time I almost got to 600 great arrows at a 50% drop, I only had 35 great arrows just to be able to test with Melania.
Oh, wow.
So these are consumables. They should be able to have a higher drop rate. Of course, with percentages, you're never guaranteed, and that's why I say, like, if you're a John Arbuckle, you're never guaranteed. It's just not going to be a guaranteed. So with the great arrows, it should be swapped with the golden great bow. I had like so many great bows by the time I was done with those runs. I had like 20, if not 30 of them, and I just kept on selling them in bundles.
Oh,
But it's
yeah.
just like I need the great arrows. I need to be able to actually acquire and actually get a hold of them. Why is the drop rate so low? It's ridiculous. Open up a store somewhere else and have them available to actually be purchased. And I like this in Demon Souls because I went for the Knight Sword
Mm-hmm.
to be able to get the Knight Sword. And the Knight Sword is pretty low drop. But right where the Knight Sword drops from that one unit that actually drops it in that area before the penetrator,
Mm-hmm.
there is a salesperson right there, and he sells the Knight Sword for 20,000 souls. So if you got aggravated and so annoyed by the drop chance to be able to get the Knight Sword, you could just farm up the souls and just be able to purchase the Knight Sword right there.
Which is lovely.
That's a permanent. The thing is I would love it where instead of just having drop chances throughout the game, you just had a vendor. And the vendor had all the items in the game. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
And let's say, oh, your longsword, it's 1,500 souls. But, the giant crusher is 1,000,000 souls. Just have it, where, okay, I want this item to be rarer in the game. So you just make it so that the purchasing price is really, really high for that item.
Oh my goodness.
It would be a guaranteed, oh, you get the item, rather than spending time trying to go and find the item or being able to farm the item. In the case of something like the Stone Club, where it drops at a
Yeah.
4% drop chance, or even, let's say, the Iron Round Shield, where it drops at a 2% chance, or even, let's say, the Knight Sword in Demon Souls, where it drops at an even lower chance. I do not like drop chances. I love a guaranteed. Warframe does the best with any of their drop chances, and of course, the drop chance would be about 10%. And then
Yeah.
for, of course, some of the farms for the frames is like 38, 38, 22, which I love those basic Warframe, the base Warframe farms. But again, drop chances here, those could be improved. Those could be a little bit better. Demon Souls or Dark Souls 3 actually did a better job, especially even with like the Iron Round Shields or anything else like that, because they had so many more units that were available to drop them in those certain areas, and you're able to actually acquire them. From what I understand, there's probably still some items where the drop chances are really ridiculously low in Dark Souls 3. Um, I haven't discovered any of those because I haven't really gone for those. But for Elden Ring, for the Golem Great Arrows, that's just kind of ridiculous.
Yeah.
Leveling, how to, overall souls needed, and what to do for every single game. So I'm going to start out Demon Souls, and I'm going to work through Dark Souls 3 and Elden Ring. So for Demon Souls, I would recommend when you start leveling, immediately start leveling on your health. Start on your vitality. Take your vitality all the way from whatever it is at a base, all the way to 50. Because then you go from, I think it's like around 500 starting health, all the way to 1,500 health at level 50 vitality. And you might think, oh, it's not worth it going beyond 40. Actually, it is because you get an extra additional 175 health off of those levels. So I'd definitely do that in Demon Souls. And then the second thing I would do is I would take your endurance all the way from 0 all the way to 40 because again, like Dark Souls 3, it caps at 160 stamina when you get up to that level. And then of course you also have 69 equip load off of that, and that way you can equip more armor, which gives you more tankiness. And of course, with Demon Souls, the roll caps are about 50%. So if you're below 50%, you're going to have the lightest roll that you can actually have. And then if you're above 50%, you're going to be slow rolling or being fat slug rolling. So it's not going to be as good. And then from there, you can prioritize whether you want strength, dex, or if you want to go for something else in terms of damage. I found that throughout my gameplay of that my starting weapon, the longsword, I would actually max that out to a positive 10 raw. And then if you get the knight's sword, with the longsword. So longsword would be your base because that's the earliest one that you can start with. Then when you get to the knight sword, which is going to be a little bit later, I would take the knight sword and I would take it to a +6 and then go the blessed route to +5. And that's what I would actually do. Because for the blessed route, you get magic damage. And when you're dealing with certain enemies, you're actually gonna find it's a little bit easier, especially for rockworms, where with a crushing augment, it's gonna take 13 hits to be able to kill a rockworm, versus if you had the blessed knight sword, it's only gonna take 3 or even 2 hits to be able to kill that rockworm. So it's a lot easier for certain enemies to actually kill them with different weapons. So I'd actually recommend going the faith route, taking faith after endurance, all the way to 20 and doing that, or depending on what you want to do, taking your strength or dex all the way up to level 30, and then just kind of capping it there, whether you want to go full physical or full or for the blessing augment, which will give you magic damage. But with blessing as well, kind of like Dark Souls 3, it'll give you passive regeneration. And passive regeneration in Demon Souls is going to be a lot better than Dark Souls 3 because with Demon Souls, you have the Ring of Regeneration, which adds 4 health per second, and with the blessed augment, it'll give you an added extra of 6 health per second, going all the way to 10 health per second, which actually is really good because in Dark Souls 3 only gives you a +2 on your blessing augments. So if you have a shield and a sword, it'll only go +4. And then, of course, the Sun Princess ring only gives +2, which it'll only go to +6 in that case. So you basically almost get double healing in Demon Souls versus what you get in Dark Souls 3. So Demon Souls for the blessing augment is a lot better. Yeah,
Uh, that is very puny healing in Dark Souls 3.
it is. Yeah. Yeah, I wish it was better. I really enjoyed playing through Dark or Demon Souls with the healing because like I would take a hit for the man eaters
Mm-hmm.
and in a few seconds it would just heal it right back. And I was like, this is great. And then you go over to Dark Souls 3 and it's like, where's the healing? Where's the passive regen on the blessed? It's like every game has a different, way it does it in the game, and it makes the meta, for the game. It's just like, no, I'm not going to go blessed route. I'm going to go, Dex route in Dark Souls 3. So
Yeah.
moving over to Dark Souls 3 for the leveling, what I would do for there is I would take your health and I would go all the way to level 40. When you go for level 40, it has I think 1,200 and or no, 1,213 health, I believe. And then when you go all the way to 50 on health, it only goes to 1,300 and something. So, or 388. So it only adds, I think it only adds like 88 health there. I think it's around there, but it's only like 100 health going to positive 50. So there's no real reason to go those extra 10 levels. And then when you're doing the vitality, that
Mm-hmm.
is going to be your number one. Number two, I would take endurance all the way to level 40 as well. But again, I would do it in steps. I would go level 20 for vitality, then 20 on endurance. And then if you're going damage, I would take your damage all the way to 20 as well. And then I'd take vitality, endurance, and then dex or whatever your damage is to 40 as well. And then going beyond level 40s, it depends what you want to be doing. Um, I would definitely take your vitality up, vigor and vitality. I would take your vigor all the way to 40. Sorry, because there's a little bit complication there because they use vigor for health and vitality for your flat defenses and your equip load as well.
I
So I'd
always get
take your
confused with vigor and vitality.
yes. So number one, vital or vigor, two endurance, 3 would be dex or whatever damage you want to use, and then 4 I would actually go vitality, and vitality can actually be very useful. So I don't say vitality or dex or strength, whatever your damage is, could be swapped with vitality. Vitality actually could be really useful. But I would take those in steps to level 20s and then going all the way to level 40s. And then when you're going beyond level 40s, I would take your vitality, your defense, or your damage. I would have a hard time saying damage because you only get 20 damage beyond that point in terms of leveling. So I would almost cap your dex or your strength at 40 and just be like, don't really go beyond that because there's not a lot of damage gained from that. And I would actually say for Dark Souls 3, you would take your vitality, your defense, and take it all the way to 99 because you can get really tanky beyond that. You can get up to plus 40% damage reduction on attacks, which makes you really tanky in Dark Souls 3. So that's what I'd probably do with Dark Souls 3. And then, of course, in Elden Ring, what I would do for Elden Ring, this is a lot of talking.
Yeah.
Uh, but for Elden Ring, I would take your health and go all the way to 60. Um, when you're talking about health in Elden Ring, I believe it's when you go to 40, it's 1,450 health. And then when you go to 60, it goes to 1,900 health. And then beyond that, it starts really dropping off after that. So it's not really worth it going beyond 60. But for the health here, especially too with Scarlet Rot, don't worry about Scarlet Rot. Scarlet Rot does do more damage when you start leveling up your vigor. But for the majority of the game, definitely focus on your health. Health in every single one of these games is going to be your number one stat. Of course, the number one two stat is here is going to be endurance. Why the endurance here is at 76 is because it does, I believe, cap as well at 40 for 160 stamina. But endurance also affects your equip load. So you can equip higher and higher levels of armor. Same thing with vitality in Dark Souls 3, where you can get a lot more tanky. Endurance here is really, really good. And then, of course, going strength or dex or whatever your damage type is. Of course, it completely depends on you, whatever you want to go with your damage type, because it depends on what weapon you like to use. If you like to use a straight sword in Demons or Dark Souls 3, you're probably going to want to go dex. So it just completely depends on what your weapon is, what you're trying to go for, what you're going to actually end up with. And here actually even in Elden Ring as well, I would actually almost consider going full endurance. And the whole reason why that is because then you can go more armor, which makes it so that when you're playing through the game that you can survive hits. So whether you're in Dark Souls 3, Demon Souls, or Elden Ring, probably your number one stat is going to be your vigor, second is going to be your endurance, and third is what it going to be whatever your damage is. Of course, Dark Souls endurance and vitality are kind of going to be in the same ballpark there. And
Yeah.
then lastly is going to be whatever your damage is because again, upgrading your equipment first should be your number one priority to getting your damage. And second should be your leveling because leveling does not give you as much damage as if you first went for getting those smithing stones and actually upgrading your equipment. So here for Elden Ring, I would suggest going all the way to I believe level 40 is where it stops at stamina, and stamina is going to get you your most. And then of course going for your strength or your dex or whatever your damage is, I believe I would take those up to 40. And then if it were me, I would actually personally take endurance all the way to 99 and then get some really, really tanky armor. I do have some tanky armor on right now, but if I was actually at level 99 on endurance, I'd probably end up equipping the whole scaled set and going the entire whole scaled set because then you just get really, really tanky stats at that point. And of course, the Guardian set early is actually a really good set at level 40 endurance because the Guardian set for full bloom adds an extra 10% health, which effectively, with damage mitigations and all that stuff, it actually makes it more effective for your health to have the negative 10% fire and just have bonus Guardian Garb. So just bonus health back as well. It's a lot of information, a lot of stats, a lot of the
Yeah.
things. But for leveling, I would just say state it simply: health first. Uh, minding with, I would say, minding what the the gating is at, where the health starts to drop off, and where the stamina starts to drop off, and where your vitality starts to drop off. And then the same thing with your damage, where your damage starts to drop off for dex, strength, or faith, or anything else like that.
Yeah.
So I would say your health first in any Souls game, then your endurance, max equip load if you have vitality in Dark Souls 3, vitality as well. And then lastly, your damage. Because again, damage is going to scale with how much you actually upgrade your weapon. Your weapon is going to be your best when you actually get more smithing stones and upgrade that actual weapon rather than prioritizing your levels on that.
Okay.
Yeah. Whew. A lot of information there, a lot of stuff.
Yeah, well,
Um,
I kind of learned that the hard way on Dark Souls 3. Cuz I had my uh endurance like way up, like 20 points more up, and it hard capped at like 40. So, I learned that the hard way.
yeah, and it completely depends on each game what they're going to have the gating system at and where those stats are going to start falling off at. Again, like what you said with endurance in Dark Souls 3, it stops at 160 at level 40, and then beyond that, all the way to 99, it only goes up to 170. So a lot of math, a lot of different things that you have to know about that. But that's what I would simply say is for damage, go for your smithing stones. And then for your leveling, go health, endurance, or equip load. Both of those kind of are intertwined because for vitality for Dark Souls 3, and then your damage last. And then even
Yeah.
with that, I would actually go more armor because it makes it so you can survive more hits. It makes it so you're so much more tanky. And even for Elden Ring, it's just the same thing across the board. Um, Demon Souls as well. When you're getting those stats up, I believe you could have actually taken endurance up all the way as much as you can as
Mhm.
well. And what was the set I was going for? I was going for Old King Doran's set for that one because there's no stamina loss. Because
Uh-huh.
for Demon Souls specifically, when you equip higher and higher levels of armor, it negates how much stamina you actually get back over time. So, like the Authority ring, or like here with the turtle ring, where it gives you stamina recovery and it adds more stamina back every second, which is quicker stamina recovery.
Yeah.
When you're in Demon Souls, there's equipment that actually negates your stamina recovery speed. And Doran's doesn't do that. It has pretty good stats for where it's at. It doesn't negate your stamina recovery speed. And then on top of that, it also has really good durability. So it won't just break on you as often as other equipment would. So it has actually has the highest durability in vanilla
Mhm.
for any of those any of those builds. Okay. So that's everything from the beginning, and then of course I kind of wanted to kind of concentrate more so on Elden Ring and Dark Souls 3. Of course, we already talked about like falling off cliffs, leveling, the differences there in there's a little bit differences in leveling, but more so we want to just kind of like more so focus on the actual game there because leveling and trying to equip and trying to get your equipment and everything else like that
Mhm.
versus the actual games themselves, how they function, how they do, and like their priorities. So I wanted to start off with the weapons. I've already done the math on this. I've already done some experiments, some testing with this stuff. So I wanted to start off with the meta, which is straight swords. I've done the test with this. I really am shocked and I'm surprised. I really love in Dark Souls 3, the Lothric Night Sword, how fast that attack comes out and how really useful that Lothric Night Sword is. And when I went over to Elden Ring, I was like, why is this so bad for straight swords? Not only are the enemies, using their shields and bouncing off your shields, but there's no real good viability for the straight sword. And the straight swords feels so bad in this game.
Mhm.
So I did some testing with it, and I come back and I go, the straight sword is actually slower in attacks than the stone club, even slower than the maces, even slower than battle axes. It shouldn't be
Uh,
that way. It's ridiculous. It's stupid. And then when you're even looking at their base damages for the leveling, even if you go full dex or full strength for the damage is lower than if you went for something like the stone club or even the battle axe, even the starting hero's weapon. The damage is lower. And not only that, it has lower attack speed. So overall, you have lower DPS than any of the strike weapons in the game or even the battle axe in this game, which is ridiculous. So
Wow.
straight swords do need to get buffed. They need to be faster, just like the Lothric Knight sword. They need to be able to just they just need to be faster. They just need to be reworked. I don't know what other way to put that than straight swords suck in this game. You
Yeah.
need to rework this. This is not funny. I was intending when I was starting out Elden Ring to actually play straight swords, and I picked up the short sword because I was uneducated at that point, and I went for the short sword. I was like, "This sucks." So I switched over to the stone club, which the stone club is actually really good for what the meta is in Elden Ring.
Mhm.
But I was so shocked that all the straight swords are not only lower damage on a base, but they have a lower attack speed than any of the heavy ended the what did I call it? The heavy heads weapon where the head is heavy on the weapon, like an axe.
Yeah.
An axe is a heavy head. If you try to stop swinging an axe, it's hard to stop swinging an axe. When you're swinging a straight sword, the straight sword has a pommel on it to counterbalance the actual weapon. Straight swords are way faster in real life than an axe or anything else. So in Elden Ring, where they have straight swords where they're at currently, where they're slower than an axe or a heavy weaponry, you need to rework the straight swords.
Yeah.
I yeah, I'm really ticked off that this game. I love the straight swords in Dark Souls 3, and I love them in Demon Souls. And you come over to Elden Ring, and it's like I no, yeah.
No.
Shields as well. I did some testing with Melania as well, and I'm probably going to put that up on the screen here as well too. But shields, and I just kind of wanted to go over this as well. Well, I'll get to it with Melania, but shields suck. Katanas with the bleed as well. Bleed damage is actually true damage, so those are pretty good. But katanas katanas actually do pretty well because the damage is actually there for them, and then they also get the status of the bleed on top of that. So for the DPS for the katanas is actually really good.
Mhm.
Um, Poison as well. Poison though versus Scarlet Rot. Scarlet Rot does almost, if not double, the damage of poison. So poison. Why does Scarlet Rot do so much damage? Even player versus player, But especially environment PVE damages way more than PvP. PvP damage it sucks. And then when you go to Melania or anything like that, the Scarlet Rot, if you're at level 27, the Scarlet Rot will actually not kill you if you're at full flasks from Melania, specifically Melania. If you're at or above level 28 on your health, Melania's Scarlet Rot, not just saying the initial damage, but if you get ticked by the damage, will actually kill you straight out with full flasks, regardless, because it's true damage. So,
Wow.
so yeah, that's just saying something. Like Scarlet Rot PvE is ridiculous. And then you go PvE or PvP, sorry, PvE versus PvE. Um, PvP damage is way reduced, but still it's double than that of what poison is. So why do you even include poison damage if it does way worse than Scarlet Rot? I'm so confused on why poison is very terrible right now. Like seriously. Um, So arcane statuses and stuff like that, is it good? Yes, it's actually pretty good, especially for something like Grey Roll, where Grey Roll has a lot of health.
Mhm.
But again, like talking about balancing those things out, yeah, bleed is pretty good. Frostbite is pretty good. Any of those statuses are going to be pretty good, especially with an arcane build. But again, with like poison or something like that, poison needs to be buffed. I don't know why in every single game it's not buffed. Even in like Dark Souls 3, it wasn't that bad. Bleed wasn't bad in Dark Souls 3, and Frostbite wasn't bad. The only time I ever got Frostbite was in Vorta Boreal Valley. That's the only time I got Frostbite. That's the only time in the entire game I got Frostbite. So that's just ridiculous in and of itself. But yeah, for arcane status, yes, most things are good. But for Grey Roll, especially, that's pretty good because when you have like the Stone Club that I have currently,
Mhm.
the Stone Club at 99 strength, which I did 99 strength on this build, at 99 strength, it'll take you around 200 hits to actually kill Grey Roll. And how many bleed procs does it take to actually kill Grey Roll? It only takes 7 bleed procs to effectively kill Grey Roll. So you can kill Grey Roll early in the game with any bleed weapon as long as you proc bleed 7 times.
Yeah.
How that works is 15 by 2, 30, 30 by 3 is 90. Add the extra 15, you're at 105% of Grey Roll's health. You killed him. Yay! I did the math on it. So,
Yeah.
yeah, bleed is really, really good in this game. I wouldn't say it's the best, but it's pretty good. I'd actually have to say strike damage is actually better because for most enemies throughout the game, whether you're talking about the Tribuna Mariner, where you're talking about, you know, miners, Crystallinians, shields, especially if you're trying to go any of the Godric soldiers, a lot of your, light straight swords or anything will bounce right off of the brass shield. But
Mhm.
with the stone club or anything with strike damage, it'll go straight through the shield, straight up kill him. Great. Yeah. So any strike damage in this game is just overpowered. Just gonna say that right out of the gate. And of course, yeah, Grail takes around 200 hits. All right, now Melania. So I was actually going to bring up a spreadsheet. I was going to bring it up, and now here it is. So Melania for the shields. Shields throughout the game are kind of redundant, kind of useless. I like in Demon Souls where shields are actually useful.
Mhm.
In Elden Ring, it's just not the case. So for a lot of these, I'm not going to read them out because there's a lot of these here. But for the majority of bosses, I actually find that, and I put it on stagger here, but stagger is actually when you're hitting an enemy with a colossal class weapon. Do they get staggered? The answer is yes for a lot of these. And a lot of these that are actually hard to kill are very easy to stagger with a colossal based weapon. Even the stone club or even let's say the brick hammer kind of staggers, but not really. When you use a colossal weapon, oh yeah, they get staggered. And it makes it so cheesy. The entire game is so cheesy at this point. But
Yeah.
for even like tier class 1 hardness tier is going to be your medium shields. Anything that is like the brass shield, that's going to be a tier 1. Tier 2 is going to be any of your great shields. Tier 3 is going to be specifically the ants shield, and for tier 4 is going to be anything with the barricade shield spell on. So for all of these, for a lot of these, it's like, why? Because even like the Bloodhound Knight's easy to kill, doesn't have a lot of health. Cemetery Shade doesn't have a lot of health.
No,
The
yeah.
Banished Knights, actually, the Banished Knights were so cheesed by a colossal weapon. I'm not even kidding. Like you hit them with a colossal weapon, they get staggered. They can't do anything. You just keep on chaining until they're dead. The Banished Knights are so cheaply done with a colossal based weapon. It's ridiculous. A ton of these. It's just ridiculous. But most noticeably, I wanted to actually point to Melania, Phase 1 and Phase 2. All shields, regardless of their class, don't stop her, don't ping her off the shield. What I mean by pinging is that when they attack the shield, they actually stop their attack and they get into a staggered animation when they attack the shield. Melania does not care at all about your tier 4 barricade shield. She'll keep on attacking straight through that shield. She'll keep going. So there, I find that to be ridiculous. Shields should feel kind of like what they should feel in Dark Souls 3 with even like the Cathedral Knight, where the Cathedral Knight puts his big shield in front of himself and
Mhm.
shields himself. It should feel just like that. Even with hammer-based weapons, it should feel like you just bounce right off that shield because shields are pretty useful. In any game, they should be really useful. Um, Especially with Demon Souls, I really enjoyed the Knight's Shield. I loved that little shield. That was great. But it just throughout the entire game, I just oh my goodness. The shields just felt so poor. Yeah, they would ping off the shield and you would get a little bit of a chance to attack them. I did enjoy the pike, but man, the colossals just take the game by storm. And of course parrying. Parrying is kind of useful, but again, it completely depends on where that chance is for you to actually get the parry off on. For Melania, why it's at 1% is 2%. It's completely based upon viability, on how viable it is for an average player to go through and actually consecutively parry Melania 4 times or 3 times to get the parry off on her so that you can actually do a Riptos off of her. You have to get consecutive parries. You can't just, oh, I'm going to wait for 2 minutes. Her parry reset timer is going to go off, and you're going to have to do all 3 parries again. So For an average player, I'm going to say 2%, 1% because it's really hard to even get a consecutive parry off like that. It's just really hard. And then, especially like, I'd say Crucible Knights are going to be your most effective one for parrying. And same thing with in Dark Souls 3, Lothric Knights. Lothric Knights are the easiest to parry throughout the entire game.
Mm-hmm.
But trying to get those timers down for different bosses, especially when they have different timers, is going to be not only insane, it's going to be implausible because it's like I was saying earlier with parry timing. It's like, how do you get your parry timing down? Well, it's dependent completely upon the enemy, what the enemy is doing and when they're attacking, and where their achoo moment is going to come out. Is it achoo, and then you parry on that chew, or is it uh achoo, and then you parry on that, or is it going to be uh uh achoo? Because some of them actually do that. They'll be, oh, I have this big wind up, and they're coming out
Uh,
slow and slower. And, okay, well, where's that parry time? Where is that? Oh, it finally came. Okay, well, I got slammed into the wall. Okay, great. So parry is only, I would say, viable up against Crucible Knights. For the rest of the game, though, I wouldn't even bother because you're waiting for that achoo moment to actually come out to actually get your parry off. And it's completely codependent on when the enemy is actually going to attack and if that's actually parryable. So a lot of the cases, it's just no. But especially like omens are super super hard to kill. Lion guardians are super super hard to kill. Um,
yeah.
Banished knights can be a pain. I can agree with that. They're not super super hard. Let's say the Cardian Knight, where he parries you, and he's really annoying. He can get staggered as well with a colossal based weapon. Um, see here, what other ones are really annoying here? Ancient Hero. Ancient Hero can be a pain, completely outclassed by colossal based weapon. Black Knife Assassin, which is the Black Knife ringleader. I've had such a hard time to actually kill the Black Knife ringleader. I've died several times to him. Completely cheesed by a colossal class weapon. A lot of these really hard bosses in the entire game are completely cheesed by a colossal class weapon. The Godskin Knights, the Godskin dudes, I'm gonna just call them dudes, because that's what they are. They are not, they're not done in by colossal weapons, but again, they're not that hard. I'd have to say the hardest, unparryable, unblockable, unstaggerable boss, sub boss in the entire game is going to be the bell bearing knights, the bell bearing hunters.
Oh, I hated the
Um,
ball bearing hunters.
yeah, they can get parried, but again, like you have to get the parry times down and everything like that. They're going to be the hardest ones in the game to actually defeat without using some cheesy system. But other than that, like Melania, even Melania is completely cheesed by colossal class weapons.
Yeah. I didn't
So
have a colossal weapon for her, and she was just too squirrely for my spells.
yeah, yeah,
So I
when
kind of had to switch to my dragon build again, and then I did fire, ice, fire, ice.
yeah, and then you pop the ice and then you reset it with fire and you
Yep.
pop the ice again. Yeah. Yeah. So that's really, really good. Um, but yeah, so like yeah, just across the board, like colossal weapons are really, really good. And the thing is a colossal weapon or a great weapon, is there any difference between those two? Yes, colossal does a little bit more stagger, like I've said. Great weapons aren't as good. They just kind of stagger, but just not as well. Colossal class weapons, when they hit, they stagger, they just stagger. There's no availability for them to pull out of it and kick you or anything else like that. Colossal weapons do a really good job on a hard, heavy stagger where they just can't attack you altogether.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, so Melania is completely cheesed by the entire game is completely cheesed. Let's be honest with it. The entire game is like a Rykard or a Yoram fight. It's completely cheesed by colossal weapons. It's ridiculous. There's hardly any skill involved with that. It's just, oh, I need a colossal weapon to deal with this. Okay. Um, I wanted to go over kind of like my favorite units in Dark Souls 3, which I wanted to mention, which is the Hollow Soldier with the Great Axe, the Hollow Soldiers with the wooden shield and the spears because they'll keep their shields up, and they'll always protect themselves. The Cathedral Knights as well, because the Cathedral Knights, they're probably like the hardest common unit in the game because they keep that shield up and then they just hit you with that hammer. And man, they're a hard one because they sit there with a shield and they block and they're just such a good unit. But the two things I wanted to mention in that class, in that category,
Mm-hmm.
is when you're in the Lothric High Wall and Lothric Castle, which is way later into the game after even the consumed King's Garden or even the Deacons at the Deep,
Yeah.
those hollow soldiers are not immune to stagger. So if you hit them with a straight sword, they get stunned and you can just chain and kill them with a whole chain of attacks and they'll get killed. Whereas if you go to Cathedral of the Deep, there's hollow great axe and great halberd dudes there, and when you hit them with your straight sword, they actually don't get staggered in the Cathedral of the Deep because they have the is it yeah Cathedral of the Deep because they
Yeah.
have their white turbans on, their white tunics on, and they just don't get staggered at all. So I wanted to mention stagger there because Dark Souls 3. I haven't tested Dark Souls 3 all that much, but stagger is pretty useful, especially for those guys because those guys actually do kill me a few times because they're just immune to stagger. They don't get staggered when you attack them. They'll just keep on going through with their attack.
Yeah.
Um, the shield and weight, though, the shield and weight is so good, especially Cathedral Knights or even those Hollow soldiers with the spear and the shield, because they'll just sit there and they'll wait. They have their shield up. They just wait, and then as soon as you attack, they just hit you with that. So it's really, really good for those ones. So again, though, with colossal or great weapons, those colossal weapons, especially like brick hammer, you could probably use as well, but the colossal weapons hit really, really hard. Um, for spells and bows, again, like you're saying with Melania,
Mm-hmm.
she just dodges those. A lot of the time, she just dodges them. It's just so annoying. And I just feel for a lot of those spellcasters, or even a lot of those people that are using bows, because even for like the Golem Great Arrows are so on such a low drop chance. I feel like a lot of that should just be pulled back so that, especially for bow builds, it's like you should have a viability if you're running bows to be able to just run the bow and be able to actually have it work. Same thing with spells, like spells casting and animation time that is increased by dex, but again, like you have to invest so many points into all these other stats versus just having the viability there already for spells just to have super fast casting time. I feel that that
Yeah.
is what it is. It just should be better than what it currently is, and it's just not. Just to end that thought though, with Melania, anything with poise damage on her is just going to be really good. It's just going to make the whole boss fight a cheese. The entire game is just cheesed by poise.
Yeah.
So,
I couldn't even use my Star of Ruin
oh yeah,
because that tracks people, and I've been using that this entire time with people who actually dodge, and it seems to get them pretty well. But with Melania, no, it does not get her really well because she has like a faster dodge animation than everybody else.
yeah, and it's just annoying too because they just run out of the way and then you can't hit them.
Yeah.
So, like, there has to be something like in the room where you can hit them and then they get staggered or something, and then you can hit them. There has to be some viability there for a mage or even an archer so that they can actually take out the boss without having a whole bunch of difficulty doing so. One thing I wanted to say though, in terms of meta, uh, for like every single one of the Souls games, and I really kind of stuck with this too when I was talking about it earlier. But my quote was, "The meta changes and shifts for every game in the Souls lineup." But this is pretty much true for any of the Souls games. It's just well, I haven't played Dark Souls 1 or 2, but like when you're playing Demon Souls or any of the other games, like the meta changes, it shifts just a little bit. Even with Demon Souls, you're changing from a blessed weapon to, in Dark Souls 3, a dex based weapon. And it's like, where's the viability for the blessed based weapons in Dark Souls 3? And I don't think it's really existent there. I think it's really nerfed. So I
Hmm.
wish it was a little bit better for every single class or type of weapon in every single game. There's a lot of balancing that really needs to happen, and it really hasn't happened, especially in Elden Ring, where you look at straight swords and it's like, I want to use a straight sword and I can't do that. But yeah, so throughout the games, whether it be Dark Souls 3 or Elden Ring, interactions and skill, which is basically like which game actually has and potentially has more skill than the other. When you're talking about interactions, like picking up things or anything else like this, I found this a lot with Dark Souls or Demon Souls. When I was picking up items, I'm like, why is the pickup time take so long? There's not a lot of difference between flasks or healing when you're healing or doing your flasks, but when you're picking up
Mm-hmm.
items in Dark or in Demon Souls, it takes almost a whole good 2 seconds just to pick up the item. So I really actually like Elden Ring's pickup, where it's like when you pick up the item, there's just no animation at all. It just goes straight into your inventory.
Oh, that is lovely.
And especially even with Warframe, when you're picking up disruption keys,
Mm-hmm.
when you roll and you hit X at the same time, you can actually pick up the key while you're in the roll animation and slap it into the disruption, whatever the terminal is. But I like that because it doesn't take any animation time to actually pick up that item. Whereas in like Demon Souls, it takes a whole, 2 seconds almost to pick up that item. So I really like it in Elden Ring, where uh, there's no animation for that at all. But especially with interactions, like you're pulling a lever or you're interacting with the world,
Mm-hmm.
which one is actually more interactable? I'm actually going to have to say probably Dark Souls 3. Dark Souls 3 seems like it's a little bit more interactable than the others. But yeah. And then in terms of skill, just for like the bosses, um, I'd actually say Dark Souls 3 has more skill in it than Elden Ring, because Elden Ring, for even like some of these really hard boss fights that everyone's been saying they're really hard boss fights, they're actually not. You just have to pick up a colossal weapon and then it cheeses the whole game. The whole game is a Yorm or a Rykard boss fight where you're picking up the Serpent Killer and or the Storm Ruler, or even in Demon Souls where you're trying to kill the Manta Ray, you're picking up the Storm Ruler. It's a whole, oh, pick up this weapon and this does the most damage to this. Well, it cheeses the whole boss fight. There's no reason to do the boss fight or to even have the boss to begin with if you're going to just make the whole boss a cheese. And the same thing with in the entirety of Elden Ring. And I'm not saying that lightly. Every single thing that's actually hard, you just pick up a colossal weapon. And for the majority of those things that are actually going to be hard in Elden Ring, the colossal weapon's just going to cheese the entire game. So the people that have been saying that this game is like the hardest and Melania is the hardest, pick up a colossal weapon. This game is an entire cheese.
Or a dragon build.
Or a dragon build. Anything with poise is going to make Melania flinch, is going to make a lion flinch. The only thing that's going to be really hard at that point is going to be the ball bearing hunters.
Yeah.
That's it. Um, when you're talking about like the bosses that actually have skill in Elden Ring, I'd actually say probably just the ball bearing hunters. Really, it's like it's just you're just trying to figure them out. But other than that, Dragon Lord Placidex is kind of in that area of skill, but there's just a lot of them that just don't have skill. Like Morg, Lord of Blood, just depends if he's going to kill you or not. Red Dragon of the Golden Order, again, it's just kind of like when is he not going to do his slam? Uh, Melania, I mean, like again though, like you can just kill her with the colossal class weapon. It's just either that or you have really good rolls with her, which would require rather than the average player, it would take an exceptional skill from an above average player to actually dodge the waterfowl downs, which I'm not going to do. I've already died 200 times from her. I'm
Yeah.
just going to say colossal weapon just cheeses the whole boss fight, and then the same thing with Astriel, Natural Born of the Void. That boss just literally two shots you. As soon as he hits you with his tail twice or does a move twice, you're just dead. So there's no real point or skill in Elden Ring to that point. Whereas in Dark Souls 3, I'm gonna say Sister Freyde, that's a skill boss.
Sister
Dark Eater
Freed.
Mitter, Dark Eater Mitter takes skill. When you're talking about even the Slave Knight, he takes skill. When you're talking about the Nameless King, he takes skill. When you're talking about the Abyss Watchers take skill. Every boss in Elden Ring, I don't feel like there's a whole lot of skill. I don't feel like there's a whole bunch of uniqueness to any of the bosses in the game. There, there is different uniquenesses throughout the game, but like really in all reality, it's just all copied over. It's just kind of the same. So for the actual skill, which game actually takes more skill? I'm going to say Dark Souls 3 actually takes more skill. And I even like even in Demon Souls where the very first boss of the game is the Phanalax boss and the little hoplites that are off of the Phanalax. I love that boss fight. A lot of ingenuity in that, a lot of creativity in that. I loved that fight throughout the entire fight. And in Elden Ring, I don't feel like there's a lot of I don't feel like there's a lot of creativity or anything else like that going on, other than maybe the fire giant breaking the bone off of his foot and then making him rip his foot off. But other than that, yeah. Um, especially too, again, like we're kind of going over story here, but throughout the gameplay, there's not a lot of story, not a lot of cutscenes, and the experience is overall kind of bland. I'm just kind of reading my notes here, but it is true because when you're going through Elden Ring and you're talking about, like the story progression and the cutscenes don't divulge a whole lot of information. It's just kind of like, here's the boss in this cutscene, go kill him, and that's kind of it. The only really good story premise or, the story overall in this game is at the endings where it's like, you get the Reign of Fire ending, or you get Rania's ending, or you do the Golden Order. So there's kind of some story, I guess, in Elden Ring, but there's just not a lot. There's just not a lot. And especially in Demon Souls, Demon Souls actually has the most story out of any of the games. And same thing with Dark Souls 3. Dark Souls 3 has a little bit more put into it, but not as much actually as Demon Souls. Demon Souls actually hits the story premise. When you start open the game, you got to watch the whole intro cinematic. It's great. It feels like Lord of the Rings off of those storylines. It feels great because they're actually telling you what's actually happening in the world and why you're involved, and actually brings in the story into the actual game, and it finishes off with the story with a great ending as well. So I'd highly recommend, if you want the story off of a Souls game, Demon Souls actually does a really good job with the story premise. Dark Souls 3 kind of, but again, like even at the beginning of Dark Souls 3, they kind of do the same thing. So there's not a whole lot of difference. Um, Dark Souls 3 has a little bit less premise though, because in Dark Souls 3 or Demon Souls adds in a lot more premise where it's, the build up and why current events are happening the way they are happening. And then with Dark Souls 3, they don't. So I just got to hand it to Demon Souls with that, because when you look at the original Demon Souls, there's a lot more story that goes into it. So yeah, with that entirety, I'm just gonna leave it at that for Elden Ring. Elden Ring, I did do the madness ending. I did because I really got tired of this game, and in particular because it's just not as good as its prequels. The prequel games, the pre-existing games, are actually going to be better than Elden Ring. And especially too with the time it takes the player to actually play through Elden Ring versus Dark Souls 3 or even Demon Souls. Elden Ring takes so much more time. It takes so much more aggravation to actually play through it. It's just harder for no reason. Whereas in Dark Souls 3 or even in Demon Souls, it actually invokes that you have some skill to actually play through those games. Whereas in Elden Ring, it's just more so cheese. uh, Dark Souls 3, especially too, with some of the bosses, especially in the Nameless King, it actually requires you to have some skill to do those rolls, to actually take the patience and the time to actually roll over his hits. And with Melania, it's not even skill based at that point. It's just cheese. So yeah.
No.
Um, I think that's about it for my notes. Yep. And of course, in Dark Souls 3, I wanted to just mention that I did die a total of, I think it's 22 times. I think I did die an extra 2 times to angels. So instead of the original 20, I think it's actually 22, but I'm not sure. Um, but with the entire times that I did die in Dark Souls 3, I did only die 8 times to bosses. So less than 50%, which is pretty good. It's telling you that most of the time you're actually just trying to relearn the game or trying to get your foot back into the groove and get back your feet back into the water and actually get back into the game. And a lot of the time it's like, okay, I forgot that there's this here, or this pushes you off the ledge, or certain events happen, and it's more memory. And I really like the Dark Souls 3 games in that term, even in the information wars, where it's like you're trying to learn the game, because it invokes a lot more memory, and there's a lot less memory that you have to allocate to that game, because it's just easier to remember where certain things actually happen. Whereas in Elden Ring, just not so much. Not so much.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, do you have anything else to add to that?
Fix torrent.
To fix torrent, yeah, torrent in this game is the most annoying. I like how in I believe it's Night Ring, the new series that they
Mm-hmm.
have for Elden Ring, how they completely scrap torrent, which yeah, should have just scrapped torrent from the beginning. But especially with ledges, especially with torrent's turn and just the annoyingness of torrent, torrent is like just the stain on Elden Ring. And I'd have to say the entire game is a stain on itself, especially with Melania and the bosses and everything else, where it gets cheesed by a colossal weapon.
Mm-hmm.
What is that? That doesn't have any skill, and especially too, I feel so badly about the straight swords. Why those are so poor right now in Elden Ring. But yeah, it just sucks. I really wish I could have used a straight sword, and they just didn't do that. But yeah, that is what it is for the winner of the Dark Souls games that I've currently played, which I haven't played Dark Souls 1 or 2, and maybe later on I get a little bit more education on that, or maybe someone tells me something else about Elden Ring that I don't already know. But for the winner of what the games that I do know are, I'm going to say number one is actually going to be Dark Souls 3. Number two is actually going to be Demon Souls. Even Demon Souls is actually going to be better than Elden Ring. So if you get the remake of Demon Souls, which is currently available on the PlayStation 5, that's actually going to be maybe a little bit better because I've understood that they've actually increased the drop chances for certain items in the game, which is going to make your entire gameplay a lot easier for Demon Souls. So I'd highly recommend going and getting the remake. Kind of hurts to buy a whole console for just specifically Demon Souls, but
Yeah.
I wish though too that they would introduce it into PC, that maybe even Steam might have it, because I would love to get my hands on the remake. I would love to show that on the channel and actually be able to play it. Unfortunately, I don't own a PS5, so that is what it is. But yeah, that's the current standing with Elden Ring. This is the cheesiest game, the most ridiculous game. I've died 200 times to Melania for no good reason other than the game just wants to have its own meta, its own desires. And again, with what I my quote earlier, the meta just changes and shifts wherever the game of the soul lines up, the souls line up. But this game in its entirety is just a big cheese wheel. It really is. And I was expecting something from Elden Ring, like a challenge or some skill base, and there really just isn't. I I can't say anything more than that. But yeah. Well,
Yeah.
is that all the time we have for this episode?
Unfortunately, yes.
And we'll see you guys in a new game and in the very next video. Bye bye.
Bye bye.